We need to talk about suicide prevention. But before we do, I have the pleasure today of introducing you to my son, Daniel. Daniel was a kind, sensitive kind of guy who lived with asthma and he had life-threatening food challenges all his life. But he adapted because that was the kind of guy he was. He adapted to any challenge he faced. He taught himself how to cook by being a fan of the Food Network, and as a result, created great meals for all of his friends and family. He made us laugh. He sure did. He made us laugh through dialects and funny expressions that he picked up from watching SNL. He was a best friend to both of his sisters. In 2007, Daniel shot a rare hole-in-one playing golf with his dad, a favorite pastime of both of them. He despised injustices, and his friends have said, Dan never did anything solely for himself. His intentions were always for the greater good, and he lived that every minute of his life, and he did. He loved music and lyrics that evoke powerful emotions, love and loss, suffering and hope. He liked the Tragically Hip, Pearl Jam, and Bob Marley, among others. He was a consummate boarder, longboard, snowboard, and his favorite was wakeboarding. And he was fearless on his board, possibly falling hard and sustaining a head injury that went undiagnosed. During his first year away at school, he called me one day and said, "Hey, Mom, I think I have OCD because I can't stop washing my hands." His anxiety, a product of years of having to be so careful of everything he touched or put into his mouth. During school, he became frustrated, and I could tell that in the tone of his conversations when he called me. But it was more likely from a growing inability to concentrate or keep up with assignments. For him, relationships began to suffer. The emotional changes that Daniel experienced changed his whole outlook on life. He had difficulty sleeping, and he had lost weight. His depression was physically and emotionally painful. He began drinking to deal with his emotional pain. Soon, he began to isolate himself, not showing up to meet his friends or calling us last minute to say he had to work on a group project. "Sorry, Mom, I'll be home next week." He felt that he'd become a burden to the very people that loved him the most. And he began to blame himself for everything that was going wrong in his life. Daniel felt the sharp edge of stigma and was unable to share his pain or feel our love. That is why we need to talk about suicide prevention. In the spring of 2009, Daniel took his life at our cottage. We had no understanding that our 23-year-old son was living with depression. 5 years ago, we did not talk about depression and disorders of the brain, much less suicide. Today, we accept that mental illness is a disease and not a flaw in one's character. And we are more aware of the many factors that contribute to depression, and we acknowledge that there is never one reason in a suicide. Talking about suicide prevention always begins with understanding what mental illness is. More than 90% of people who take their lives have an underlying mental health disorder. Many times that disorder is never identified. The common thread here is the stigma associated with the disease. Never forget that. So stigma. Why does stigma impair someone from seeking help? Someone living with a mental illness believes that they are personally to blame for all of their problems. They feel shame, and the worst, they feel they become a burden to those around them. Through suicide prevention awareness, we are able to identify and offer compassion to others, and we're also able to understand our own feelings of despair. Through suicide prevention awareness, we all can become advocates, reach out to politicians and mental health organizations, and push for enhanced mental health supports. Talking about suicide prevention often takes away the stigma that's related to mood disorders. Understanding contributing factors in mental illness and suicide will save lives. Time and hindsight have allowed our family to understand our son's emotional and physical pain. And although we were unable to prevent his suicide, I know that Daniel's story has resonated with many and initiated life-saving dialogue. Let Daniel's story be a call to action for everyone in this room today. No one should ever, ever have to suffer in silence. This prevention checklist is really simple, but it might allow you to understand your own emotional changes or perhaps some changes in someone else. Get it. Educate yourself about mental illness and understand the contributing factors in suicide. Manage it. Learn strategies to manage stress and changes in your life. Share it. This is probably the most important. Remember that mental illness is a disease. It is not your fault. Please share your emotional pain with someone. And I'll leave you today with a short video that was inspired by a chapter in my book, and it's entitled A Letter to Daniel, and it illustrates the emotional pain of depression and the brutality of losing a loved one to suicide. A Letter to Daniel.
In the days since you've been away from me, I've had time to reflect and remember what a joy it was to be with you. You've left me with pieces of yourself, parts of you that I hold close. I shook when your dad told me the news was not good. Why didn't you answer our calls that night?
And I am feeling so small. It was over my head. I know nothing at all.
You were a daydreamer, always thinking as you gazed out a window.
And I will stumble and fall.
What was out there that I could not see?
I'm still learning to love. Just starting to crawl.
We didn't have the chance to know the other young man that you had become.
And anywhere I would have followed you. Oh, say something, I'm giving up on you.
You did not have to die. I had to make sense of our loss. I had to accept that you would not be coming home. Daniel, we love you. I love you.